friend of mine, she said, "Hey, LaSean, we're working on this secret project at Microsoft. We'd love for you to come back and join us." I came back at about $35 on the Microsoft price. The ability to earn money in big tech, I think a lot of times folks just underestimate it. The absolute dollar amount, I actually made more money over the years at my time at Microsoft than that initial seven-figure exit that I made selling my little mobile app company.
Welcome to Tech Careers and Money Talk. I'm your host, Christopher Nelson. We want to understand, how do we go from building equity in technology companies to our own personal exit? For many of us, the exit means many different things, but we need to see examples. We need to see examples of what success really looks like in a personal exit. I'm excited to introduce you today to LaSean Smith. LaSean is a technology employee who's worked for larger companies like Microsoft and Amazon, and he has exited financially independent to run a micro PE company. This is a set of companies that he is the owner, operator of, owns them outright, and their main metric is cash flow. He wants to see that cash flow increasing year over year so that he can make more investments and it also can provide a living for himself. Today, we're going to talk in the first half of the show around what were the skills that he built in tech companies to allow him to make this transition to running a micro PE firm. Second half of the show, you're really going to want to stick around for us. We're going to break down the components of this business, how he built it, how he runs it, how he operates it today, so that you can really have clarity on how you can go from equity to exit. Let's go talk with LaSean now. Okay, thanks for joining us here today. I am so excited to introduce you to LaSean Smith. LaSean Smith is the founder and managing principal of CAGR, but he started his career in big tech like many of us. I'm talking Microsoft, Amazon, Deloitte, and built a lot of skills to then transition into this business that he now owns and allows his financial independence. Interesting point is he started his career as an entrepreneur, 10 years old, on the playground selling Chico sticks. Welcome, LaSean.
Hey, Christopher, great to be here. And for folks who don't know, Chico Stick is this kind of peanut buttery kind of candy. So anyone with allergies will want to stay away. But I figured, hey, sugar sells. So I learned some of the basics of consumerism early on.
Well, and it's so interesting that, you know, when I read your story, read your background, you were so entrepreneurial growing up, but you made the decision to start your career in big tech. I'm curious why that was, why you decided to move to big tech instead of creating something of your own early on.
Yeah, well, maybe before and after aren't the best words for me to describe it. And it's really been kind of this windy journey. And so I had attempted to start other businesses before that and really didn't have the right operational muscle. I have, pretty good product instincts, and technically, I was pretty strong, but, I was that guy out there building the product, hunting for the customer. And so I had the whole kind of pyramid inverted and, wasn't validating the market properly, wasn't sorting out the go-to-market. Like I was doing everything backwards, right? And I was like, well, I can write a great piece of software that, no one wanted. And so what I found was the folks that I respected started to find their way into some of these larger companies, and I would get opportunities, and eventually it worked out where kind of that ikigai, something that was quite interesting to me that I could add value to, that I got energized by, and we can get into this maybe later in the conversation. Not only was that great from a skill stacking standpoint, but it actually connected me and helped me learn how to think about money. And so I don't believe those two are decoupled. And so I always try to bring this into the story, in that it wasn't just like, oh, I got this job, I learned this skill, I started the business. It was kind of this expansionary thing that happened very organically. I didn't have a master plan. I got very fortunate to have a great set of coaches, mentors, and sponsors. And really, the only thing I can take credit for was, I kept showing up.
And I think that's very insightful, where you know your weaknesses, you know where you need to fill a gap, and there is such a big opportunity in big tech that I feel gets a bad rap sometimes. Many people think, well, the real work is being done on the startup side. However, I found for myself the same thing, that I had an entrepreneurial spirit, but there were so many things I didn't know. And I knew that going to work for big tech, my first role was at Accenture, and I got the opportunity to be in a lot of different environments, a lot of different company environments, seeing how businesses worked. And that to me was, again, this exhaust that you get of working in these larger companies is you get this on the job MBA and understanding how business works at the same time as you're skill stacking your technical and soft skills as well, that I think is really valuable. I'm curious, what were, as you started going from, I know my strengths, to now participating in larger tech, how did that skill stacking work for you?
Yeah, so if we use, I like frameworks to kind of put some context to the conversation. There's the BXT triangle that PwC has, kind of business, experience, technology. And I like that because, a lot of what I've learned has been in kind of different disciplines, and I've tried to figure out ways to kind of fuse them together. And so if I think about the business side of things, again, I just really was green on how to really think about go to market and scaling. I had a fear that I've coached folks on that I got over pretty early on selling. So I was like all about the selling part of this, right? So you're like, throw LaSean in a room, put him on a plane, like all good. And so even later into my career, I would get these kind of side jobs in corporate America where, I was effectively doing, tech sales to the C-suite. They would just kind of pawn me off. They're like, hey, you put LaSean in the room, he'll kind of figure that out. So I was pretty good there, but the actual kind of sales operation process, how to manage your funnel, both high touch and low touch. So the marketing side as well. It was just like a random hodgepodge bag of activities. And like, I just really needed to see what great looked like to start pulling that together. The other piece on people was, I could write, a JD that I copied from a peer, and it's like, all right, this looks pretty good. It's just like, all right, let's just go out and hire folks. But to really look at what kind of the talent pipeline process looks like, how to write, an amazing job description, bespoke one-offs, not that you're copying, pushing it so far on the limit that someone in PR or someone else might say you're giving too much of the background. Our competitors are going to be reading these job descriptions to do competitive intelligence, to really make folks feel like, okay, they took the time. I understand what this is. Also to get people to opt out that process. One of the things that was really great during my Amazon experience was kind of the rigor of the interview process and how you kind of rethink the idea of, kind of multiple board-based interviews, especially bringing folks outside of the hiring chain into the process, where those folks don't have anything to lose to say not inclined on an interview, right? They're just like, I'm here to hold the bar for our hiring practices, and how you can, kind of bring those all together. One quick anecdote that was very helpful in that process was the tool that we use to provide your feedback. You cannot see the vote. Everyone had a thumbs up or thumbs down, and all the notes for whatever leadership principles you were interviewing on. You didn't see the vote or the notes of the other interview folks on the panel until you submitted yours. And so it's almost this like game theory thing where you're just like, what do I put here? And it forced you to tell the truth, or at least just to be more thoughtful and say, all right, I'm not going to go with the group thing. What are my real feedback? So those are all things there. And then just practically on the technical side, how to think about, distributed systems and to kind of build technology in teams. It's funny when I see a college hire show up with a computer science degree and they go into a tech role, kind of their first job out of college, and so many just, need to get their interpersonal skills up, or, really understand the hygiene and the implementation of maybe how, source control is managed in a certain company, because it's not so much about the tools and the tech. It's a bunch of humans saying like, okay, am I empowered to make this change myself? Is there a committee that needs to review? There's all these things that are really about kind of the human interaction, and all of that was goodness. that I took from that. The very brief counter to that set of experiences is, many times, especially at large established companies, not just big tech, what you see is folks are nervous. I had a buddy who worked at Coke, and I said, "What's your real job?" He's like, "Don't break Sprite," because you're measuring your wins and basis points. Like everything is so you're at scale. And
That's
so
right.
many times there is a very, very high level of risk aversion. I used to call them the no police. The lawyers would show up, some compliance officer would show up, and all well intended, but they had been incentivized to slow things down. And I like to say that large companies move in months and years. A well-run startup is a growth startup should be running in weeks. And if you're very early stage, ideation to pre-seed, maybe even seed, you need to be running in hours. Like you have to move fast. And so that's a thing that I've tried to learn to remind myself to do the opposite of the big tech. But the list of what I learned is much deeper than the things not to do.
Well, and to recap that, I think that that's very interesting because what you learn there and the takeaways are super valuable for people who are operating startup companies. And I'm curious how, we'll talk a little bit later how this maps to what you're building now or have built now. But you talk about understanding where you had your zone of genius, like you were in the sales, but the operations part, you didn't understand that. And you have a chance to see a pattern of what success looks like. And I think that that is so valuable. If you see that 2 or 3 times, if you see the people, processes, and tools that come together to make something successful, a successful process work, that's going to be stamped in your memory for a very long time. Then it's, how do I hire correctly? How do I look beyond the textbook? Okay, yes, I go put out a job description, somebody applies, but if you put more effort in up front and you're truly running it like a candidate magnet where you want to attract the candidates you want to push away the candidates that you don't want, all of those things, when you go to start your own company and you just have those 2 things alone, superpowers, then you get this experience that says, now I also understand at scale what it looks like when you get to very large distributed companies, distributed systems. And, there's some fragility. There's also, some value in that. But then how do you scale that back and say, what do I need to do if I am a smaller, medium-sized company, startup company, or seed company? All of those lessons are really important for us to digest here, because that's what's going to allow us to work for larger companies and then to scale ourselves in building other things that we want later.
Yeah, 100%. And something you said there that is worth underscoring. Sometimes I feel there is this inclination for folks to believe small company doesn't need to scale, big company, everything is scaling. And I've seen so many times where, some really smart technical architect is overbuilding something at a big company that has no business ready to scale because you haven't validated and gotten to the right place. And people are, again, they're driving toward their incentives, and they're like, all right, our OKRs or some set of goals say that we need to get this metric by this target by this date. And so that means, of course, we need all this redundancy. Of course, we need all these microservices. Of course. And it's like, stop it. You can run this thing on a single node server, make sure the customer wants to give us money for this, and then we'll go figure out what to change. And invariably what happens, as you know, what you built is not what they exactly wanted anyway. And so a lot of times all that premature optimization doesn't really help. And so I really have tried to embrace this idea that, your customer will tell you when it's time to kind of get into the scaling stage. It's tempting to do that when you have, a larger set of resources, which can sometimes be a curse when you're inside of a large, well-funded organization.
Well, and this demonstrates to me why leadership and having broad oversight of what's happening in the broader tech community is important to bring that home, and being able to say, we need to be nimble now. We don't need to be scaling. I just see that, pervasive throughout technology, that good leadership is critical to understand how to make business decisions that are best for the customers.
Yeah, totally.
So I'm curious, with your experience in big tech, did you start getting an understanding? You worked for Microsoft, you worked for Amazon, you started seeing, owning shares, being part owner in these companies was something that was beneficial to you, understanding the equity component?
Oh, 100%. So I'll go through this quickly, but I think the chronological flow is helpful. I've started four plus businesses. I'll give you one of the pluses, but four businesses where I was the operator prior to the company I run now. The first was a agency. I just kind of gave up, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is really hard. I do not want to be in this business." So basically, just shut it down. The second was a SMS to large stadium screen marketing tech software, where we were kind of working with brands to say, hey, we're going to give you all these phone numbers when you sponsor, this campaign inside of a stadium. And the tech was actually pretty good. We had landed, MLB, NBA. Like we had done made some real progress with that. That one ended up as an acqui-hire. And so it wasn't the worst business, but it was like, oh my goodness, we're going to need this crazy sales team in like every football city. I was like, all right, this is more of a sales company than it is a technology company. I worked on a money transfer system. And again, we underestimated the biz dev. This was before Western Union would go into high risk places, and all the banking and regulatory issues. Like it was like, all right, LaSean, you're doing dumb stuff. So there was a plenty of these. I started a mobile enterprise company that would connect backends like SAP and other things to iOS. Kind of development in the early days of the iPhone, and that was the company that I sold. And we just kind of found this kind of arbitrage window where sales teams and other folks needed to get this data, and kind of today, which sounds laughable, you'd have like some REST API, get a token, and off you go. We built a whole company around the inefficiency of that because folks were so frightened, that this data leakage would like have their data all over the place. And so everything was kind of like batch data warehouse processes where it's like 2 days ago was the most recent sales data you could get. And we said like, oh, we could do this in real time. And it was like magic. So that was the first exit. But the reason I run through those is, all of those were, LaSean coming from a place of, I think I have the right idea. I'm going to go give this a shot. But there was no clear strategy. Even the one that worked, I can't take any credit. Again, I just kept showing up. But here's the punchline back to your question. When I exited that last company, I did all sorts of things wrong. Fortunately, we didn't have any outside capital when we sold, and so it was a good outcome for the company. But my tax strategy was all broken. We closed the deal toward the end of the year, so I didn't even have time to learn on how I could reposition and maybe get some offsets or get some accelerated depreciation with another asset. Like all the basic one-on-one stuff that someone will sit you down. It's like, all right, you're going to have a bunch of money in your bank account. You should probably go get some experts to help you get ready. I did all of that wrong. Another thing is I really disliked kind of being in handcuffs on not being able to build, and I didn't have the right discipline, and so I broke my earnout, and so there's money left on the table. So there was all sorts of things that was really kind of unforced errors on my part, where it was just like I just fumbled the ball. And in spite of all of that, this is what I love about tech: the tailwinds of the industry, the way cash flows, like I still made out really well, right? And so in spite of not knowing, you can still win. Like that to me is like the thing I get excited about. And just a quick anecdote: when I started that business, I was a boomerang at Microsoft, and so that means I was there. I left to start a company, and then I ended up coming back. And I'll tie this all to your question because it's very relevant. I had about $250,000 in RSUs, and I was like stressing out because I was pretty young, and so I was like, goodness, this is like $250,000 of unvested, RSUs. When I leave, this is just gone. And when I finally found the courage, I was like, I had the conviction, like, this is going to work, LaSean. Like we're not gonna do the dumb stuff we did last time. We're gonna figure out this sales motion. We're gonna go pre-sell and get all the right, kind of contracts in place earlier in the process, before we start writing code. So all of those lessons, I did, but I was still terrified of giving up this relatively small amount of money. And it was funny. I was talking to my CPA a few months into the business that I started after I left, and I said, "Is this the right amount of cash in the account?" And there was almost $800,000 in the bank account. And it was like, I had this moment. I was like, oh my goodness, I was so stressing over this small, tiny bit of money. And now just, our working capital, for this bootstrap software company was, a couple, 2-3 magnitudes bigger than that. So anyway, that was an interesting kind of transition. But when I decided to go back into big tech, the reason I was trying to think, I had a mentor who said, "Hey, LaSean, if you have something that you're really convicted around and you're going to really stick to it, I can't tell you what to do, but if not, you should probably go hang out someplace where you can be energized, add some value, and you're not being tempted to do reckless thing with your capital." And I was like, all right, I'm going to listen to this person, somebody I trust, been a friend for many years who had been very successful. And so a friend of mine that I knew, she said, "Hey, LaSean, we're working on this secret project at Microsoft. We'd love for you to come back and join us." And at this point, I knew a lot more about how to structure the contracts. I knew a lot more on how to think about leveling, so many different things. But the real punchline was, I structured a really, really healthy stock package. And, for folks who know the history of big tech, I came back at about $35 on the Microsoft price. And then, I think there was at least one split during that window. But the ability to earn money, in big tech, like to your point, I think a lot of times folks just underestimate it. And if you look on the absolute dollar amount, I actually made more money over the years at my time at Microsoft than, that initial 7-figure exit that I made selling my little mobile app company. And that's the thing, right? When I talk to folks, many times people are like, "Oh, this is LaSean, he sold his company." They never say, "Hey, this is LaSean, he worked as an engineering leader and he made some money at this corporation," right? But when you look at the actual numbers, getting that timing right was really critical. And just putting a bow on this story, the way I've leveraged big tech in general has been looking for these technology inflection points where you get to, whether you're an individual contributor, an IC, a manager, or an executive, you get to show up at the party where no one knows what the answer is. And
Right.
it's kind of the Peter Thiel 0 to 1. I love that space because if you grind, you move with conviction, you show clarity, and you iterate quickly, you will just iterate to the answer faster than anyone, any of your peers, and you will be rewarded. And so there's a whole lot of goodness, and that's just been kind of my playbook, kind of bouncing back and forth between these, learning from both sides of the fence.
There's a lot to unpack there, but I think first and foremost, so many people think the money is in the early stage startups, and they pass over the fact that if you're slow and steady for big tech, number one, you're going to be taking dollars off the table in years where, the startups, there's no liquidity. So you think about the time value of money, there's an opportunity there to, start building a financial fortress. I also really enjoyed your specificity around looking for inflection points, because there are different times. Even right now, you think about AI. AI is a very interesting inflection point to start inserting yourself into companies where in those specific companies, non-AI companies, they don't know the answer, and they're looking for people that can have conviction, iterate quickly in a direction, and roll up some things with clarity. I think there's a lot of interesting opportunity in big tech today.
Totally.
So you and I were talking earlier about the fact that we get into big tech and it is easy to get comfortable, to maybe lose some vision, to, be sleeping in our silk sheets, as they say. And then but then you start getting a desire to move on and really understand, well, what's next for you? At what point did you start realizing my time, and maybe it isn't a clarity of my time in big tech is done, but there's something else out there for me and I want to graduate into what's next. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, since I've I look at this not as a fork in the road that never changes, and there are more seasons. I look at it: what's my skill stack, what's my interest level, and where are these opportunities? And this is where I have a technical background. Why I really embrace sales and finance, and like that's been kind of the thing for me. Even today, that's kind of the reason I do the job that I do, because I love the opportunity to be able to move through all three of those. But whatever someone who's listening might see as their unique skill stack, I think you have to take that into consideration. So, if someone has something hyper unique, it's like, don't dismiss that as like this, like, oh, I have this weird skill or this strange experience, or, I speak this language that, maybe isn't, considered like a global business language. Like, don't discount any of that stuff. Like, go sit in a room and figure out how do you kind of pull this together. And, just like you might do with a product where you're doing problem story fit, you're trying to do kind of your founder story fit or your kind of employee story fit to kind of figure out how all these pieces work together so you can inspire people and they understand like, oh, this is what Christopher is amazing at. And when you are making yourself that one of one, there's just so many opportunities in general, but people don't know how to value you. And so that to me is the magic, right? I like to tell folks, when we talk about kind of working, I know at least in the US, a lot of Western countries, like how much do you make is like one of these weird taboo things that's either, it's like, it's embarrassing to ask, or, it's kind of crude. Like, we don't talk about those types of things, but just from a practicality standpoint, somebody who makes $150,000 at a company, and someone who makes $950,000, like they are not at the same financial velocity, but we might all say like, oh, they're 6-figure earners, right? Like it's like this Boolean, like one bucket of people. And so this idea that there are so many ways for you to take your skill set and go and leverage it, I think is important. But also once you start turning that skill into dollars, just having clarity on kind of where you're at on your journey, I think is so important, because, no offense to some of the folks who are early in career who maybe they've made their first $1 million. Like when I made my first $1 million, it was like amazing. It was transformative, right? And I thought I had it all figured out. And I'm like, okay, there are so many seasons to this. And so those folks are like on TikTok and YouTube telling folks like, I found the secret. And it's like, it's like one of those things, if you've ever been to a fancy hotel where, you think you're at the top floor and then you find out the penthouse actually has its own elevator. There's always another door. And so we're all leveling up in this game. And just be really cognizant to the current season. And I'm sure, many of the principles that you teach on just kind of basic financial wellness is also part of this journey.
Well, this journey, and I think for many of us, LaSean, we're trying to understand. Many of us didn't come from money. I know I didn't come from money. Then all of a sudden you step into it. Then it's two things. It's how do I manage it responsibly? Not go out and be, some sort of, multimillionaire cosplay, because we all know that you can lose it just as fast as you make it.
Yep.
And then it's how do we start transitioning this into a combination. I call it a portfolio lifestyle, where I have some of my dollars working for me. I'm also now taking my skill stack and I'm leveraging it to create multiple streams of income to then to support a lifestyle that I want to live. Okay. I want to have more time with my sons. I want to have geographic independence. These are some of the things that are important to me, but that's where I think people in technology understanding, going back to your story, which I think is really relevant to when you focus on skills, you also then are aware and understand the money, and all the time being focused on business. How do you run and operate a business?
Right.
You can then get to a point where you say, okay, now how do I translate that into what's next for me? How do I graduate from a single full-time employer into now running a portfolio of things?
Yeah.
And
And oh, go ahead.
yeah, no. I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I was tying it back and making sure we close the loop on your previous question because these are connected. Once you kind of hit whatever your version of financial independence is, I think psychologically a lot of things change, right? And so I like when I'm coaching or mentoring folks around their business. Someone may have aspirations of creating a unicorn. Someone else like we want to get to $100 million of top line. Somebody else is like I just want to make $500,000 a year. Like everybody has different goals. It's all good. I don't look at lifestyle business as a pejorative. I'm like living life in style sounds amazing. I'm like that sounds pretty fantastic. So anyway, for me, when I have observed kind of an undeniable trend, you may be familiar with the Matt Ridley's book, The Rational Optimist, which is the punchline is look for a unique point of view where the rest of the world is looking at things through the lens of pessimism, and you see it through the lens of optimism. But you're also being rational. You're not just some pie in the sky, your timing's off, or your capital stack is like wonky. Like you really see something that you believe others don't see, but you see it in a positive light. And there's this example after example he gives on kind of the economic upside when you can take that approach. And that's just been my inflection point. Web 1.0, Web 2.0. I worked at this company, that young people won't know, called Motorola for a few years. That was my first product manager job after my MBA. And through all of those hops, I was like, all right, mobile. I mean, the reason I went back to Microsoft is to work on this product that we created called HoloLens, which was a mixed reality AR VR platform. And so one team was working on hardware, another on OS, and I was working on the app stack and owned product strategy there. And through that, it's like, all right, now, the Apple Vision Pro is coming out next quarter. And I got like years of information in my head from jobs many, many moons ago for all of that stuff. And so when it comes time to, look at a batch of companies who are like, we're building B2B apps on top of Apple Vision Pro, I'll get it wrong plenty of times, but my batting average is going to be way higher than other people because I understand the 3D, real-time rendering art pipeline. I understand the thermal issues. There's all these things, fatigue of having, a computer on your face. There's you're not going to be on social doing news and things like this. It's going to be a productivity focused type tool. And that's just one anecdote of all of these pieces. And so when I look at things like Gen AI, it all connects, right? Because when I worked on HoloLens, I ended up managing a computer vision team. And then that really got me deep into AI. And so while I'm not an expert at LLMs, I have a really good handle on understanding artificial intelligence, or at least how we're applying it today. And so all of those things start to compound. And so I'm a really big believer that when you can see these trends, these mega trends that are going to have huge tailwinds, like whether you go employee route or you go operator, business owner route, if you figure out your ability to be right often, that's actually a leadership tenet at Amazon, that you're right a lot, right? That's actually the name of the leadership tenet. That's really, really powerful because a lot of technology, regardless of how you show up and what vehicle you're kind of generating money, it's about timing. Like we can all be technologists and talk about the future, but it's like, okay, what quarter, what year, what decade does it hit? Like that's where the money's at, right? We're all right if you give us a 50-year horizon. So anyway, I just wanted to come back to say, like, for me, the impetus was like seeing this undeniable moment where it was like, oh my goodness, this next wave is so magical. And, I kind of figure out, all right, where can I create the most leverage? And once you've kind of hit financial independence, I just think the psychology shifts on how you look at that, what time horizon you're willing to play, and how risky does it feel. And for me, this is not a risky move at all because I have that conviction.
Well, I think because you have the conviction, you have the skills, and you've built enough businesses to understand also how it works. And I think, and this is a good transition point for us to start leading into the second half of the conversation. what I observe for people who work in big tech or even people who work in startups, they take them through IPOs and they generate wealth, and they honestly have enough wealth to become financially independent, meaning they could rely on that wealth to transition into something else. They would arguably need some cash flow for it, but they don't have it presently. They struggle with this transition. They struggle with, okay, how do I now turn this, what I have, my wealth, or how do I, maybe I haven't ventured out and been my own entrepreneur. How do I transition it? This is why pattern recognition, understanding what you're doing, what you're building, I think is really important. And I want to go in the second half of the show. I want to go and do a bit of a deep dive, a bit of a reverse engineering into how you built CAGR, which is a micro PE company of multiple businesses that I think some you acquired, some you built. Because as we get into tech, number one, when you are working in big tech, it can burn you out, right? There is a lifestyle, a 24/7, you're plugged in, great rewards, but eventually it needs to stop, I think, for your physical and mental health. And understanding how you transition to something is really important. So we're going to dig into CAGR and all that stuff in a few minutes. We're going to be right back. Just hold on. All right. We are back here with LaSean Smith, and LaSean runs CAGR. CAGR is a micro PE firm that's made up of, how many companies are you holding now?
4 companies. I've written 12 checks. I can talk more about how we're doing a roll up right now, but all of those have not been successful, so we can get into that as well. But 4 companies, and again, the learning process that we talked about on the employee side, I've been learning as well on the investment side as well.
Well, let's talk. I think first and foremost, let's start off with, what is the thesis that you have for CAGR? Because it sounds like I know I've read it, so it's very clear, very succinct. What would you say the thesis is for CAGR?
Yeah, so at its core, my belief is audience and automation are key pillars to the future of, digital and software businesses. I'm starting to look at local B2B, home services, and some kind of, what folks might call boring businesses, and figuring out how those levers get incorporated as well. But most simply, I look at anything that's going on at the macro level. On the sales side, the levers around customer acquisition continue to get out of hand, and so you have price makers in the form of Alphabet and Meta on advertising, and I just think paid advertising is a very dangerous kind of foundation to drive your business. And then on the sales side, when you get to any meaningful scale, I'll stick to SaaS because that's an area where I know pretty well. At a certain point, your sales mechanism starts to bump up against the world-class engines, right? You're selling against a Salesforce or what have you. And so folks do all sorts of things. They try to partner, they hit their marketplace, we're in co-opetition. But at some point, Microsoft, Oracle, or Salesforce, or someone's going to have a better sales motion than you. And this is why you see a lot of those tuck-in acquisitions happen over the years. It's like, okay, we could build this to 500 salespeople, and we're not going to sell our product, which actually may be better than some of these engines. And so the counter to me to that is, folks finding ways to continue to optimize a traditional high touch sales funnel, or to really figure out how to operationalize a low touch funnel. And that's what I believe is a huge unlock for these smaller businesses. Much more challenging to do at scale. But if someone says, hey, there's a business and this is going to cap out at 10 or 20 million in top line, I believe a very human driven brand, with content marketing, organic marketing, really is the unlock for these. And you can't rush it. And this is, kind of tied to the capital type. This is why I don't think they're very good fits for VC. You can't blitzscale your way with this process. Sometimes it can take, months and months. It could take a year and a half for you to start seeing some benefits there. And so you really need this patient capital to go pull that off. And so audience is the first pillar. Automation on the back end, and just being very efficient. The way I like to describe it more actionably is I'm trying to run async companies. right? And I found that to be the descriptor that can help, because if I generically say automation or something like that, it could just be used so many ways. But we see what happens when you have a remote first organization that says, hey, we don't need everybody at this stand up on this one time of the day, where, somebody's up at, some odd hour of the day, and then the other person is like, how can we change, right? And so the idea of, we do a ton of, video Loom type recordings, so we don't need meetings. We're a writing first culture. So, you write it down, so you're not freestyling in the course of a meeting. You're not thinking the ideas on the fly. And so there's a bunch of these kind of best practices. But the real kind of investment thesis there is, if you can build an async company, you can start to decouple all of the strenuous points across the kind of the big beats of sales, delivery, and support. And so I'm just on a mission to look for those types of companies. More specifically, I'm in the process of a small roll-up to service small businesses kind of throughout their value chain. So how do they start, grow, and sell? If you've ever worked with, an investment banker who's going to go help a company, sell, and they go work with a small business, many times the small business isn't sophisticated, or the deal's too small for the right type of investment banker to pay attention to them. So basic things like their data room, their SIM, that's their confidential information memorandum, like all the stuff it takes where you I put years in this business, I got it to the right place, now I'm ready to go, get this check. I've learned a lot through this process on, how do you, not just grow, but sell the business. And so what I'm doing right now is rolling up a set of small tools and software plays to help folks do more DIY on this, so they don't always have to get priced out of the market because they're a small sub $50 million deal that a traditional bank won't pay attention to. And so that's the lane. It's audience and automation, and it's really focused on helping these smaller businesses start, grow, and sell themselves. And there's all sorts of interesting conversations that spill out of that, but much of it is a contrarian view that says you don't have to grow a massive business to win. You just need to be very cognizant of your capital stack. Because the more of that pie you own, there's that saying that I hear VCs, some of my VC friends say, well, LaSean, do they want to own a big slice of 0% or a small slice of 100%? And it's like, sure, yes, mathematically, but most of those, folks who are going down the VC path, it's not going to hit to their third, fourth, or fifth try, right? And so that's a 15, 20-year journey that you're committing to. And if you just look at the cash on cash, there's so many ways to just make more predictable money, not getting on that, that hamster wheel. And so I just look at it, call back to our early part of the conversation as another path, not the path, but another path. So as you hear me talking about this, it's not just what I do. I'm also kind of beating the drum to kind of drive awareness that this is another lane that people can consider.
Right. And so it's really, because I know you're focused on the automation, is it attention? Was that the first one?
Audience and automation. Yep.
Audience and automation, and then you're looking to buy these high cash flowing businesses. So you're creating a portfolio where you're spending your time and effort, but it's also kicking off significant cash flow. Did I read that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, and that I think is so important for people to understand, because it goes back to one of the things when you talked earlier about the rational optimist. I think there's two things that I've observed, and this is where I'm trying to bring data to the table, is when it comes to working for tech equity, so many people look through the lens of startups and say, oh, the only way you can make money is through startups, because that's what the media talks about, the drama, the ups, the downs, the failures, the successes, when it's like, no, let's actually look at the boring equity of working for larger companies. And then it's also the same thing in portfolios. People get stuck in their portfolios because the majority of technology employees that I know, they earn their wealth in one or two companies. They have probably 60% of their portfolio is that single or two stocks, which is incredibly risky. Or the rest is in the market, and some is in venture, where again, they're in this whole venture mindset that says, okay, I'm trying to get two or three things to hit. Going through this interest rate rise and seeing, asset prices come down and, a lot of, startups failing. I've seen a lot of people get crushed by this.
Yeah,
because
the markdowns are going crazy right now, 80, 90 cents on the dollar.
Right. Versus, to your point, if you look at this, contrarian thinking, I think of, Cody Sanchez, people like yourself are saying, let's go buy these boring, high cash flowing businesses, anchor your portfolio in that and move. I'm not saying that you have to liquidate everything else, but I'm saying, how do you actually move a portion over there and create this as a business that you operate? And so I'm curious to understand for CAGR, what is your current role and what are some of the businesses that you're spending time on right now?
Yeah. So the part I just want to underscore that you said that's very important is as you look at this, you want to not only have the right assets, but you want to figure out what the right allocation is for your destination and your path, right? And so I don't preach a way, like, I don't have a system. What I've learned is I will get myself in trouble if I invest in certain things. Before, I invested full time. I had done a number of angel deals, and my first vintage, I got really fortunate because I just invested alongside of other people. I had enough sense to say, well, let me go with some folks who are pretty smart at this already. And, those are really tiny checks, right? Those early angel checks are, 25, 50, $100,000. So these aren't big money checks, but you need to have a couple million, $2-3 million set aside because you need to have a good chunk to write those initial checks and have a little more for pro rata if you're really going to get serious about it, right? And so what I learned from that is, number one, I looked at a lot of deals, right? To get to 30 some odd checks, you have to look at a lot of deals to get to that level of throughput. And I found it was like, all right, LaSean, you have to know yourself. And I got really excited about the ideas. Like, I'm going to be a super angel and I'm going to be the best advisor. And like in many of these cases, I did get advisor shares in addition to the check. I'll have a couple board seats. And I just told myself this crazy story. And really at the end of the day, when there's something on fire and there is value to add, folks will give you a call and say, hey, I'm thinking through this thing. But you're not in the mix, right? You're the phone a friend. And so I found that it was too far away from the making. I was like, no, I'm not at the stage where I want to be that hands off. At the same time, I didn't want to go back to big tech and be in those situations where, oh my goodness, I'm in some, weekly, monthly, quarterly business review of one of my peers. And, he's a nice guy, but I don't really care about his business. I want to focus on my thing. And, all the meeting overhead and other things that happens. And so I knew that wasn't the way. And so the reason I put those as kind of the starting points is I don't have a passive business at all, right? I don't run a hold co. The reason I don't, I love that word, in its kind of simplicity. But for the most part, really a hold co means that every operator is running these businesses, without, any type of interaction. And while I've tried that, I found where I'm both most energized and where I can be most helpful is where I'm on the hook for setting up a lot of the process. And I'm effectively the coach, right? So there's still somebody who owns that track, but it's more akin to how I would be a manager of managers inside of a big company. There's some checks and balances. So I'm not in the approval flow for work getting done, but I am part of the strategic kind of driving of these businesses. And then I'm using phantom shares, which for folks who aren't familiar with that, it's an old concept that has kind of found new life. It's a type of profit sharing where you let folks participate in the distributions of a cash flow centric business based upon some set of incentives. But if they quit, then those go back to the pool and you get to reallocate them. So you don't end up with some wonky cap table. And so I really love those types of tools. And what I'm attempting to do is really be thoughtful about who are the folks who they have a gap that doesn't need to be fixed, right? So that's another thing we think about leadership. It's like, well, you have these gaps. And I'm more of the strengths finders type person. It's like, okay, like, let's not be egregious with your gaps, but let's lean into what really makes you solid. So some of the businesses that I have that, are pretty pedestrian. One is a visual identity firm. And it's like, well, people could go get a logo off of Fiverr for $25. And consistently, the guy who runs that, he's doing $15,000 to $20,000 branding projects. And the reason is like they're not chasing down a customer who, needs a $100 logo. They're chasing down folks who need a $50,000 or $100,000 package, and it sounds very cost competitive because of how they deliver that. And so that business, with the right sales machine, like, it just prints money. It's not a big business. It's not massive, but it's highly profitable. Another example is I bought a small web app development shop. Those are a dime a dozen, right? There's like, how would you even survive in that world? And I just made a small tweak and said, you all aren't going to do any more of these kind of trivial, just kind of web apps, because a lot of these kind of SaaS apps are just kind of crud apps anyway, right? They're just forms over data, and reposition them to conversational products. And so they're a product design company, and they only focus on this current wave of conversational products. And so folks are trying to figure out, how do I incorporate, Anthropic or OpenAI or some type of LLM into my business. And so there's just a clear lane, right? And so these are not meant to be, in this current wave, businesses that will, survive 15, 20 years. I know that. But the cash that's throwing off, from those companies helps me kind of cycle it into the next wave of ideas. And as I said, I'm really passionate about this idea of helping small business owners move through the full life cycle. And now that there's more cash to play with, I'm looking at some of these traditional things outside of tech, like home services, construction trades, and what have you, that have kind of a local moat. Because, I'm here in Seattle. There's somebody in St. Louis who could just copy my business. All good. I don't have a plan to go into St. Louis. There's all sorts of goodness if you can take audience and automation and then apply it to those types of businesses as well. And again, all of this stuff is connected. All that goodness that I learned at a big company can now be applied to how we run our goal setting, how we do strategic prioritization, how we do our experimentation plan. That's one of the things that I learned at Amazon that was very powerful, on setting financial budgets for your experimentation. So it's like, all right, what's your experimentation cadence? All right, weekly. How much are you willing to spend on experiments in either lost revenue, cloud costs, employee time? There's all sorts of attributes here that you can calculate over the next 90 days. And you might say, all right, we're willing to spend, at our tiny little companies, we might spend $80,000 on experiment. When I was at a big company, we might say we're going to spend $12 million, on experiment for 2 weeks. And you go A/B test or multivariate test this thing, and you are writing these things like hypotheses. You say, we hypothesize that X, and then what you're going to do based upon outcome A, B, or C. And when you write like that, all I have to do is show up for a 45-minute weekly business review and do a one-on-one with the operator. And then off they go, and I believe I can scale to about 6 or 8 of those. And so I just love these types of approaches where you're taking the best ingredients from all these different environments and kind of making this fusion dish of a company.
Right. I mean, this to me is where you've taken your skill stack that you've developed so well, and now you're focusing it at these different companies, generating cash flow that then becomes essentially this self-perpetuating machine. And it's focused on cash flow, which I think is, to me, having a portion of your portfolio that's kicking off some good, healthy cash flow is just, I mean, what I've seen as I've been studying the portfolios of the ultra wealthy is you need to have a healthy portion of cash flow to be able to maintain and reinvest as you go forward. Just having growth only creates a lot of risk.
Yeah. And tying that, I do think it's important. I think your audience will understand this, to also think about your tax strategy in all of this. And so when this cash is getting thrown off, I'll just give you a little insight to how my business is structured. I have what legally looks like a holdco, even though I have a pretty active role in much of this work, where all of these initial baseline deals get parked. And that's so they just look like departments, right? And so all of that can be cross collateralized. And so the CPA knows how to go chunk this out, but it's no different than a big company having a consumer business and a B2B business or what have you. We're just a little baby version of that. And then when something gets to enough cash or some other legal reason, when it gets spun out, it's its own entity, usually a subsidiary of that. And but the beauty of all of this is a lot of that cash can even compound inside of the company. And then when you need to make a distribution, figure out what you're going to do. I found that while I love real estate, I have to be an LP in real estate. Because when I first sold my company, I did all kind of crazy stuff. I invested in movies. Don't do that. I was fortunate that some of these things did well, but it was really more of the outcome of ZERP and all of this like cheap money floating around that the streamers were just buying everything that showed up and because they had cheap money, and so that's not a reliable business plan. I built 2 spec homes, and again, like just super random things, right? And what I found was I need to stay in my lane. I know how to make digital products, like that's my thing. And so my kind of investment strategy is very, very simple. I have a fair amount of my net worth locked up in my investment vehicle. I still have, a decent size of my RSUs that I haven't moved into an ETF or some type of index because I believe in a company like Microsoft or Amazon, and I think it has some more way to go. But really, the bulk is just I have some T-bills for my short term. I have a bucket of cash, and I have a decent amount of money in VTI. Like this is the most simple, again, not financial advice, but like the most simple, basic thing. And then I have 4 pieces of real estate that throw off a little bit of cash, but they're fully managed. I'm horrible at anything related to the operational element of real estate. And so anyway, I say that to give some broad strokes of like how I've structured my system. And what I found is if I want exposure to, say, real estate, I need to be an LP. I need to give somebody else some money and just say, like, if that's your life, like professionally that you're doing, like go be great at that. And then I'm going to focus here instead of thinking like, hey, that's interesting over there. What you got, Christopher? Maybe I could partner with you. Like, no, LaSean, stop doing all of that stuff. Like that just gets me into trouble.
Well, and I think that's such a wise, self-observation that you've made, because as we transition from full-time employment to what I call, the portfolio lifestyle, you're just really, truly managing your portfolio. You need to have certain sections that are on automatic, that you are letting experts do those things, because our passion and our joy is going to be spending our time operating the things that give us the juice, right? The things that give us that feedback, that activate our zone of genius. And I have definitely seen people tripping over their own shoelaces because they want to have control in all aspects, and that ultimately weighs them down. And it's the same adage as if you're in corporate and you're trying to have too much control over your team, you're never going to be successful because you're not moving to your zone of genius. You're trying to do everything, in half measures.
Yeah, totally.
100%. So, so what's the future right now for CAGR?
Yeah, so we are going to roll out this new brand early part of next year. And again, think about companies, let's take a financial fintech product like Wealthfront. What they find early on in almost all of these is like, okay, we could do robo investing, but now we need to do this other thing. And like, you start to tack on all of these pieces. And so my focus, for 2024 is really to start finding all the gaps for the kind of the small business journey and determining where to partner and where to buy, because some of these are regulatory, I'm not going to buy a white label bank, right? There's all these neo banks out there. That's a silly thing. So that's going to be more of a partnership. But then there's other things where it's clearly it should be part of the fold. And the goal is really to figure out how to fill all those gaps. So I'm doing what's called an outcome based community. And the community here are small business owners, and the transformation of the outcome that I'm banking on is the belief that financial independence through business ownership is a huge predictable way, in spite of all the wonkiness in the economy, for folks to get FI without a ton of permission. And so that's where I'm going to continue to focus. And along the way, I just love to talk to anyone who is on their journey as an entrepreneur, especially if they're looking at smaller businesses, because I can pattern match. I learn things, conversations like these spark ideas. And so I'm out here just continuing to kind of figure out, how do I fill this? And we don't have a ton of time for this, but I'll give you a quick anecdote on how I look at the market. I have this simple definition of a market. A market is a group of individuals who share a problem that's painful, recurring, and is quite pervasive, right? And ideally, if it's a great market, it also is a group of folks who have the willingness to pay for that. And I try to validate that as early in the process as possible. So while I do very few incubation type deals. The beauty of acquiring a company is you figure out if there is a market there, right? Like, you just go look at you get access to their Stripe account and their bank account, and you can go see how durable is this money. And so as I'm going through, I'm also trying to figure out, is there any shift in behavior or regulatory issues or technology pieces that are going to allow different segments or industries of these small businesses to survive and thrive in a different way? So, for better or worse, people, I don't mess with F&B, like food and beverage or restaurants. Like, I don't know how to add value. Customer cash flows are very brittle. But there are all sorts of things that are like core to our economy, especially at the local level. And I'm just super, super interested in how can we reinvent some of those. And so whether, somebody has a crawl space company or a roofing company, I just like, there's untapped opportunity there for these to be economic engines. And just, just a finer point on that. If you look at what the folks in Groundworks are doing down in San Diego, they started as a PE firm. The investor, the GP, shifted to becoming an operator to go run this business, and they do foundation repair, right? So it's a pretty vanilla business. And the last public number I heard, this is a private, is PE obviously, was $800 million top line a year, right? Fixing foundations, right? And there are all of these businesses that are in that range where you could do tens, in this case hundreds of millions of dollars, and you're never going to be in the media. No one's going to know your name. Like, it's all good, but you're really kind of driving this real economic engine. And just going full circle, I love this idea of, go get your personal finances in order, grow the gap, delever yourself, working in tech, then use that money when you're ready to either buy a company or figure out a way to de-risk starting a company. And then I like the base 10 approach. Go make $2, then 20, then 200. And, and eventually, to me, the psychological point for a lot of folks is once they have a couple $100,000 in their bank, Charlie Munger used to say $100,000, you believe it can work. I believe when you're at that next zero, you're at $2 million. Now you're like, okay, I have enough breathing room, and you can kind of like, kind of move with intention. And then from there, you're kind of in the club, and it's just, kind of time to get to work. So these are all the things that are energizing me and keeping me excited. And the goal is really to not only kind of make money, but do it for a customer base that I really love.
And that's so important that we leverage everything that we've learned and the opportunities we have now to really make impact. And yeah. I'm huge subscriber to that as well. And especially right now, there is we're in the middle of this great transition of wealth, right? From the baby boomers to the next generation. And people talk a lot about assets. The reality is there are a lot of businesses right now. And I just saw one in my hometown of Oroville, California. There was a it was a sporting store, but also behind they also had a business where they sold a lot of reloading shell equipment. Mm-hmm. And they didn't have anybody to pass it on to. And so, it was a thriving, successful business, part of that community that probably could have gone on for years. They ended up shutting it down.
Yeah.
I've
selling seen it that so many times. There's a fence company that's closing down not too far from me. And it's like fences. it's like what is this? And the reason the business did so well was the big box stores, the Home Depots, Lowe's, what have you. They don't have enough stock or the specialty components, and so there's this really practical gap. And they're likely going to be shutting it down just because they can't find a buyer to kind of keep that going. And these are not complex businesses. How you think about all your add-ins and valuing a business. Sometimes the owner is not properly accounting for their contributions. That's why they have metrics like seller discretionary earnings and other kind of evals. Right. But once you actually normalize and see like how much cash is actually kind of spilling out of these companies, there are plenty where if you're great at hiring the right people, there's enough cash to pay them, and then your forced depreciation or however you're going to drive up the value of that business doesn't have to be reinventing it or totally changing things. A lot of times it's just these small tweaks that really transform things.
Right. And many times for us in technology, it's bringing technology.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be sophisticated. I know we're going tactical and kind of abstract in this conversation. So hopefully folks are keeping up as we Zoom, as they say. But one of the things that I've been guilty of as someone who knows how to make things. I'm like, oh, we'll build an internal piece of software for that. And it's just like dumb, like don't do that. And so when I look at some of the current batch of AI tools, we'll put the more technical tools to the side, but even simple things like Microsoft Copilot, it's $10 for a Microsoft 365 license, $35 for a Copilot license. And for $45 a month, you now have given that team member basically their own assistant. And, these are the things that I feel operators should really be looking into. There's the switching costs, obviously, for getting in and out of these tools. And so that has to be factored in, but that's a big deal. And there's so much to this goodness where it's just like, okay, is there just a spreadsheet where you already have your data? Just have your team members talk to that data like that. You don't need a custom expensive workflow tool. That's a $45 a month solution. And I'll put an asterisk. I believe that this next wave of software products for business are also going to be disrupted on the business model side because compute has gotten so cheap. We talk about GPUs and AI and all these types of things, but the actual cost to run a basic SaaS product has plummeted. And so we know how to build these tools. They've gotten much, much cheaper. And I actually think that per user pricing is going to be under duress over the next few years. And that's an opportunity for investors because the beauty of the resilient, recurring revenue of SaaS is maybe one of the second best business models of all time. And what's lovely about that for folks is that you can collateralize it like some type of annuity stream. But I believe even that's going to be attacked because there's smarter ways to build. And so if you're an investor or you're a builder, don't just think about, what the tech is doing, what's the new latest language, large language model, but how can the same product that people already have on their P&L, how can you make a 50% better version that you sell for 10 cents on the dollar? I mean, this was the whole Google business model when they went with paid ads as they competed with broadcast television and print. They said, "Listen, we're way cheaper, like orders of magnitude cheaper." And so I'm just using SaaS as an example, but I think we're going to see some price compression on some of these things, and that's also an investment opportunity.
Truly, truly. Well, I have a feeling that you and I could keep jamming on this all day, but no, thank you so much for sharing with us, your journey, the skill stacking, everything you learn and how you've translated that into CAGR. I want to end up, we're going to do a special fire round because I know that you subscribe to Stoic philosophy. So we got 5 questions around Stoicism that we're going to throw your direction here. So how has Stoicism influenced your approach to entrepreneurship?
I'll give you 2 quick things there. First, I love to say move without permission. And so I'm always looking for opportunities where I do not need a gatekeeper to move forward, focus on what I can control. The second half of that is I like to start from the end. Part of Stoicism says keep the end in mind and then work your way back. We know that, but many times we don't operationalize our lives through that lens.
Yeah, that's so important. We really do.
Yeah.
So, can you give an example of a challenging business situation that Stoicism helped navigate that adversity?
Well, there's so many, but in spirit of a kind of a lightning round, I'll say first the principle is focus on execution, right? So I found myself time and time again getting caught up in, the latest tech, the newest thing. Like, look at this prototype that I built over the weekend, everyone. Isn't it so magical? And if you, I'll go to another Matt Ridley book. We called him out earlier with The Rational Optimist. He has a more recent book called How Innovation Works. And he talks about the flows of inventors rarely benefit from the economic, upside. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be an inventor, but just look at history. Innovators take that prototype or that invention and they go figure out how to sell it, how to make it cheaper, how to drive awareness. And a lot of what happens in tech, especially in large tech companies, is you're part of the innovation system. And sometimes, a company might say, oh, Oracle didn't build that. They just sold that or stole that or, and there's all this language happens, but I don't think folks really understand there's a taxonomy here. And the inventor class is different than the innovation class. And the innovation class is different than the operator class. And so what I had to learn was many times I was misplaced in what position the business was in. And I should have been in the operator class trying to take someone else's innovation and just selling it, operationalizing it for a specific customer. And I was over here trying to invent something. And it's no wonder it didn't work. The company I was talking about with the SMS to Stadium, that's a great example where like we built some really cool tech and, real time, there's all these things back in the day where you didn't have enough cellular coverage and we figured out all these redundancy hops and like technically it's very interesting. But at the end of the day, what we should have done is figured out, all right, can we operationalize this sales engine? And we didn't do that. And so, just focusing on execution, I think is really important and figure out, do you really want to be an inventor, a innovator or an operator? None of those are wrong, but make sure you move with intention.
That's great. What Stoic practices do you incorporate into your daily routine?
So two things right now, just now, that control how you react. That's something that I'm always reminding myself. Someone prompts you with something, how am I going to act? More tactical and maybe actionable for the audience is I practice calendar journaling pretty religiously. And the short version of this framework is you go through your calendar 2 to 4 times a day and you have things that you booked on your calendar, but sometimes you actually spent that time a little differently. The meeting ended up early and you called yourself learning and you watched a educational video on YouTube. You said you were going to go write this memo, but you took a longer lunch break. And this is not about hustle culture or like squeezing out every kind of drop of productivity. What it's about is treating your time budget the same way you treat your bank account budget, right? So when you log into your bank account, you see how much money you have. I say when you log into your calendar, you see how many minutes you have to spend that week and how can you be very intentional. Right. And the punchline of this tactic is you go back, I do it in 15-minute increments, and I go refactor everything I did. And the point of the exercise is not to show anybody or to publish it, but it's to say, LaSean, you said your destination, what you want to accomplish in the next quarter, year, decade is X. I have it written down. And then you spent your time here. And I'm checking myself, holding myself accountable throughout the day. And so I love this framework because you don't have to buy a new piece of software. You don't have to be obsessive as LaSean and do 15-minute increments. You could do 30 or 60. And you don't have to keep the streak. My streak has been going on. The current one is about 2.5 years that I've logged my life in 15-minute increments. But do it for, like a detox. Do it for a week or 30 days. And you'll see like all right, I probably shouldn't have watched this extra 3 hours of Netflix this week. And again, no judgment, right?
Right.
Just ask yourself, what is your destination? And if you're violating your own stated destination, then maybe you want to spend your minutes in a different way.
Wow. That's very, very powerful. I like that. Yeah. What advice would you give to tech employees or entrepreneurs who are interested in the Stoic approach?
I think the big one is don't pay attention to status. Naval Ravikant talks a lot about this, but it's just something that I really have to remind myself, because it's easy to get drawn in that game as you kind of go along the way. A very simple way to state this is don't pay for TechCrunch articles. and like people will understand, like the same, like Forbes is probably another good one where, if somebody wants to cover your startup because you're doing something great, like fantastic. But when you raise funds, let's say you're a venture-backed, company, many times they're going to connect you with a publicist, and that PR firm is going to say, we're going to help make you famous, and we're going to go get some coverage for your company. And a lot of these placements are paid or pseudo paid, and it feels good to see so-and-so just raised X million dollars. And guess what? Your customers don't read TechCrunch. And so just getting your head out of the social reinforcement of LinkedIn and these other places where all of us live and we see each other and we're trying to compare each other. And it's like, oh, my buddy just, raised X million. I remember this real story. I know this is lightning round, maybe super quick. Buddy of mine raised $15 million for his startup, and we had ideas at a similar time. And I was just like sulking almost. I was like good for him. Like, this is like one of my best friends. And I was like, man, but he raised 15 million. I mean, it was basically a $15 million seed round. So like, this is a meaningful, size seed round, right? And like super sharp person with pedigree. So this, I'm not surprised that this happened, but then I'm like, well, where's my $15 million for this idea? And like, you got to look inward, focus on what you can control. And so much of this stuff is just ignoring status. And I think status is a proxy of our measuring where we are in our journey, and remind yourself that you're in competition with yourself.
Wow. It's really powerful. Yeah. And so what do you think are the key benefits overall of just embracing this that you felt, being in business, being in tech?
So the name of my company is CAGR Investments, compound annual growth rate. And I really believe compounding is the magic. And so I didn't pick a financial metric just because it's like, oh, this is all about money. I believe we can compound our personal development, our relationships with each other. And if you really look at operationalizing how you show up day to day, that kind of get 1% better every day. To me, that is the magic. And we know that compounding is exponential when you really commit in that manner. And so I always say, like, I got to get back to the making. I have a North Star that is 6 words, 3 sentences: know thyself, make things, stay free. And that is really driven by these Stoic principles to make sure that I'm focusing on LaSean and not everything else that might be happening around me.
Well, that's so good. Well, LaSean, I can't thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for the time. Appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next time.
Great to hang.
Thanks. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I just have one ask. Please go to techcareersandmoneynews.com. Yes, techcareersandmoneynews.com, and subscribe to our new newsletter. That's where you can get weekly information on how to grow your career, build wealth, and meet your financial goals. Thank you.